Good to have each of you here this morning. I wish I could stand up here and tell you I've got it figured out. I don't have any problems with anger or I'm only mad at the right things. But that'd be like me saying I've tamed the tongue, I don't have any problems with that either. But here we are talking about a topic that is important. And we're going to be focused on the Proverbs today. And in the book of Proverbs, in an effort to teach his son about the good life, Solomon has some things to say about the need to control anger. We often fail to recognize just how anger adversely affects the relationships we have in so many different ways. And Solomon has a surprising number of things to say about the topic of anger and the reasons we need to be able to control our anger, and then practical advice on how to restrain that. So that's what we're going to be looking at this morning, and talking about this idea of controlling our anger. There we go. So the effects of uncontrolled anger is that we act foolishly. In Proverbs 14, 16, and 17, which is our scripture reading this morning, a wise man fears the Lord and shuns evil, but a fool is hot-headed and reckless. A quick-tempered man does foolish things, and a crafty man is hated. Also in chapter 14, verse 29, he says, he who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts folly. So uncontrolled anger reveals our foolishness. We know the truth of this just by looking at the world around us and thinking about people who get mad and the things that they do, and whether it's somebody who cuts you off driving or drives poorly, and how do you react to that? Well, sometimes it upsets you, and you're like, what are you doing? And other people, they'll go and chase the driver. They'll go drive around and, what are you going to do? What are you going to do following somebody around? Of course, some people do some crazy things, but the idea of road rage and things like that, when you think through it, doesn't really make a lot of sense, is kind of foolish when you think about that. Nor would you think about, somebody in the checkout line and, maybe the cashier doesn't do what you would like them to do, or they don't recognize the coupon you have or the sale that's going on. And what are you going to do? Are you going to show yourself to be foolish by how you act? Are you going to blow it out of perspective there? It shows we can't control ourselves whenever we take things like that and we end up acting foolishly whenever we get upset. It also causes strife. Proverbs 29 and verse 22, an angry man stirs up strife, and a hot-tempered man commits many sins. Of course, the idea of strife being contention and discord and brawling and matters like that. Our anger creates problems in our relationships. Our anger doesn't resolve those problems. When is the last time that you blew up at the sales clerk? Hopefully you haven't, but when's the last time you did and then it all went your way? That you got what you wanted? When's the last time that the outburst of wrath you involved yourself in gave you the desired result that you wanted? That usually doesn't happen. Our anger creates problems, and it escalates situations into contentious quarrels. And we can certainly create many problems through our anger. Proverbs 30 and verse 33, this is a pretty good one. They're all good, but this one I like especially. For as churning the milk produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. What a great visual to think about. Maybe you're different than me. I don't have any experience with churning butter, but I can appreciate the process and how you would maybe accomplish that. There's probably some YouTube videos on that. But we can understand, okay, if you churn that milk, it's going to create butter. If you twist somebody's nose, it's going to produce blood. But thinking about stirring up anger, it produces strife. That's going to be the result. It's going to cause problems. There's going to be issues and strife that comes from that. whenever we involve ourselves in that. He cannot be taught. Proverbs 29 and verse 20, do you see a man who's hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. It's a very telling proverb. There's no hope for a fool. And it repeatedly tells us about the terrible situation that it is to be a fool in this life. The whole Proverbs talks about those kinds of things. Don't be the fool. You want to be the wise man. You don't want to be the foolish one. But the person who's quick to speak has even less hope. And if somebody's hasty in their words, it tells us an awful lot. And we can see this in the idea of anger because it is reactionary. It doesn't calm the situation. It's not one calmly dealing with a situation. And if we decide that we are justified in our anger, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of hope for us in that as we continue on that path. Chapter 19 and verse 19, a hot-tempered man must pay the penalty. If you rescue him, you will have to do it again. So a very similar point here that's made. There's no hope because you don't learn from your mistakes. You don't learn from your errors. And it's going to have to be some consideration there on a result, because if you rescue him, he doesn't learn the lesson, he's just going to do it all again. There's no point in giving help to someone who's hot-tempered because they're not in control of themselves. And it's going to have to happen again and again. Cannot be taught. Very serious one. He is defenseless. Proverbs 25 and verse 28, like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. What value is a broken down wall? Not really. If you're trying to protect the city, a broken down wall is of no value at all. It makes the city defenseless. It leaves it open for attack. In the same way, someone who lacks self-control is defenseless in many ways. How are you going to show someone that you are a Christian? How are you going to show someone that you are a child of God with how you're living if you're really not living it? If that's the thing that people are looking at, there's no self-control. You're showing yourself to not be a true disciple of the Lord. You are leaving yourself vulnerable in your walk with God because your wall is broken down, and there's no defense that's up. When something doesn't go the way we want, we lose control. We don't have a grasp of our emotions, and we get upset easily. And what that is a weakness. Satan has found a weakness, and he's going to use that in an attack. And we have to be aware of those things. It leaves us defenseless. We may have a lot of other good qualities, but that's going to be a hard one. It's going to be a hard one if we don't do something about that. And just as if you have a hole in your defense or your walls of the city, you're going to want to rebuild that pretty quickly because you're open for the attack. We don't want to be defenseless. Anger is also contagious. Proverbs 22, 24, and 25, do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared. That's a pretty important one to think about. Anger is a learned trait. And that's why Solomon spends this kind of time talking about these things. And he also tells us, don't spend time with someone who is hot-tempered and easily angered. You might learn the same traits. You might learn that's how we deal with situations. That's how we deal with problems that go on. And certainly as parents, we have to be thinking about those things. Think about what you're going to emulate for your kids. How are they going to look at you whenever problems and difficulties come your way? How are they going to look at you and say, this is what mom and dad did to resolve whatever the issue was? What are they going to remember? And the last thing you want to do is let that be the thing that they're remembering on how you dealt with one thing or another. We will teach our children with outbursts of wrath as a way to deal with things going on. How is mom and dad going to deal with negative situations? Well, that's going to be on us to figure that out, how we're going to deal with those things. The New King James says, and sets a snare for the soul. We're putting our souls in jeopardy when we act this way, We're putting our souls in jeopardy when we decide to associate with people who react that way. And certainly we're setting a snare for our children if they're brought up with that kind of behavior as well. So it is something we have to be careful of, and what a great and sobering proverb that is to consider about how contagious that can be as we see the result of that far too often in our world. Well, let's look at a few reasons to control our anger. Certainly, it shows strength. In Proverbs 16 and verse 32, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. You know, we think a lot generally of somebody who is really strong, someone who you might consider to be mighty. Obviously, somebody who captures a city is someone strong and powerful. But think about what he says here. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty. If someone rules his spirit, he is more than the one who captures a city. So the strength of our character says a lot more about us than the strength of our might or something like that. Some physical attribute pales in comparison to the strength of character. And how we handle situations is seen by others, and it will have a greater appreciation, a greater respect shown by others towards you when you have strength and control over the things that go on with your character and with your emotions. So certainly it shows something about us, and we can all relate to that. You've seen people handle very difficult situations in a good way, and it leaves you thinking, wow, that's powerful, because they didn't blow up or they didn't go to this extreme or another. They kept themselves in control and handled things in a different way. It shows strength, and those kinds of characteristics are seen by other people. It also shows wisdom. Proverbs 15 and verse 23, a man has joy in an apt answer, and how delightful is a timely word. You know, the ability to say the right thing in a difficult situation shows great wisdom. And rather than just being reactionary and reacting, we need to be able to be calm and rational when we're speaking. And it should bring joy to the lives of others as well as ourselves in making sure we handle things appropriately. Proverbs 14 and verse 29, he who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts folly. So it shows wisdom. It also brings honor. Proverbs 20 and verse 3, it is to one's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. We've read a lot of Proverbs here already this morning that talk about how anger brings about strife, but think about what he says here. It's to one's honor to avoid strife. You know, we don't want to bring strife, we want to avoid strife, and that's what brings honor. It's honorable to avoid strife, which means we have to be in control. We have to be able to control our anger. Proverbs 19 and verse 11, a person with good sense is slow to anger, and it is to his credit that he overlooks an offense. You want to have good sense? There's a way. Be slow to anger, and it's to our credit to overlook an offense. Not everything, we use this phrase sometimes, not everything's a hill to die on. You don't have to be that way on every issue. You know, choose your battles, so to speak, but use good sense and make sure that you are handling things correctly. That is honorable in the sight of God. Well, let's talk a little bit about how to restrain some anger. We first need to know the outcome that we're talking about. Know the outcome of a hot answer. If you're going to get upset about something and show that, know what's going to happen from that. Know the outcome. Proverbs 15 and verse 1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Anger does not achieve the results that we think it's going to achieve. And a lot of times we think our anger is going to have a certain result or a desired result, and it's going to cause somebody else to turn from whatever they're thinking to get them to do what we actually want them to do. That generally doesn't happen, though. It doesn't usually go that way that we think through. Anger doesn't usually bring about an apology. If it does, it's because the person's like, okay, I apologize. Not really a real one. Anger doesn't bring about a resolution to the problem. It usually escalates the situation. It stirs up strife, and a harsh answer brings up more anger. And, while we may talk about being nicer to the unhelpful clerk or the person that's driving poorly on the road, consider the effects of those kinds of answers to our family. It's not going to bring the desired result into the home. So we need to know that up front. We often use anger to get our way on a situation. But all these many proverbs you go through show us that it really doesn't help us get our way. It brings strife into the equation. It brings problems to the situation. You're not going to cause your spouse or your children to do good things. You're not going to really get them to do what you want them to do through this kind of anger. You're going to have an argument with your spouse. You're going to build up resentment with your kids. And that's going to cause an atmosphere in your home to be one of conflict and strife, where people are just waiting for outbursts of wrath. They're waiting for anger, and knowing those things are just going to be a normal part of life, which it shouldn't be, of course. Proverbs 17 and verse 14, the beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. We simply make matters worse through our anger. What makes this difficult sometimes is you've probably gotten your way at different points in your anger. You've probably gotten your way whenever you did the very thing we're talking about not doing. And so it's something that we learn sometimes, that it's a powerful tool, because sometimes we get our way. So maybe you're thinking, well, no, I don't really get into an argument. I get what I want. But is it really what you want? Do you want to get your way because of intimidation? You want to get your way because of fear? Do you want your spouse to do what you are saying that they need to do because they know they're going to get their head, knocked around if figuratively, of course, if they don't do what you want them to do? As Christians, we know that's not really what we're looking for. We're not looking for just someone to do what we want because they're afraid of not doing it otherwise. We want them to do what we're asking because they know it's something that we like, or it's something that we would prefer. And we've asked them about that. We would like them to do that because that's what they want to do as well. And we get upset because that doesn't happen. So what happens then? Well, we try to make it happen. And then that's, of course, where there's problems. But are you willing to go down that road to destroy relationships, to cause problems, to bring this kind of anger into the home? And that's also true for our children as well, and what they're seeing and what they are witnessing as they are around us. Of course, there's a line there between being firm in our rules and boundaries and not crossing those things. But we don't want to use fear and anger as a means towards our children. We don't want to be we don't want that to be the motivation that they are using in order to, or that we're using in order to bring about a desired result. There's a difference between bringing punishment for violating rules and blowing up in anger because our children might frustrate us. So we have to watch ourselves and realize that anger does not bring about a desired result. You may get a result, but it's not going to be in the way that it needs to be. Become slow to anger should be what we are striving for. Previous proverb talks about a soft answer turning away wrath, but Solomon also said in verse 18 of chapter 15, a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. So we need to be people who are slow to anger. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, of course, we have to realize the need to be slow to anger. If we don't see the purpose of being slow to anger, then we're not ever really going to accomplish that. Nothing will ever change in that regard. We're going to continue to act how we always have. But we need to be able to see the effect that anger has on ourselves as well as others around us. And the point about us acting foolish in the process needs to be seen as well. We need to see how anger affects not only other people, but our children, how it affects our home situation. If we're going to provoke our children to wrath, we're going to stir up strife. Know that those things are going to happen. We need to be slow to anger so that that is not the case. God has, of course, commanded us to be slow to anger, as passage there in James 1, verses 19 and 20 talks about. My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, for man's anger does not bring about the righteousness of God. So realize that. We have to be slow to anger. We have to be moving towards that and not the other direction. Something else we can do is to listen more and react less. Yes, I know that's a lot easier to say than it is to do, but that is something we have to strive for. Listen to what other people have to say. So often, what are we doing when there's any kind of problems or discussion or difficulty? You're not really listening to the other person, are you? You're thinking about, I'm going to tell them this. I'm going to say this over here. Not even hearing what they have to say. You're thinking about how you're going to make your argument better, how you're going to do this next part of your discussion in a better way. But we have to consider that we need to listen more to what the other person is saying rather than being angry, rather than wanting to win an argument. Listen more, react less. Stop talking. That's also hard to do, isn't it? Stop talking to win the argument. Discussion becomes rather unproductive whenever we feel like we're just going to have to be right, and doesn't matter what the cost is on that. All you can really do is state what you believe and why, and have to let that be. We can't make other people do anything, and they're going to have to figure that out themselves. We can, make the argument. We can say the things we need to say, but we don't have to, verbally beat them to death over it. So stop talking if it's not going to bring about a desired result, or it's going to cause all these other things we're talking about. And then finally this morning, anger does not bring about the righteousness of God. We're supposed to be more like God. We're supposed to be living more like the Lord. We're not going to bring about that kind of life with our anger. And we're not supposed to have those things going on in our life. And if we are losing our souls to anger, we're going to have to learn to be slow to anger. We're going to have to learn how to deal with things in our life better. And it comes from not only a recognition of that, but working towards those things. I know these things don't just happen overnight. Just like Bible study or growth spiritually, any of those things take time, but we have to be working towards those things. To be slow to anger is to be more like God. That's what we're striving to be. That's who we're striving to model our lives after. If you would open up to Psalm chapter 103. I know this isn't in the Proverbs, but it's very relevant here to think about the need to be slow to anger, to be more like God. Proverbs chapter 103, starting in verse 6. The Lord performs righteous deeds and judgments for all who are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the sons of Israel. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness. He will not always strive with us, nor will he keep his anger forever. He's not dealt with us according to our sins, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his loving kindness towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. Think about those words about the characteristics of God. Think about his love and compassion. Think about his being slow to anger. And then you consider what all he's done for us and how we are trying to be more like that, not the other way around. Think about what his track record is, how he dealt with people in the Old Testament. Yes, he had a law. Yes, he had things that were hard and difficult. But think about when the people didn't do what they were supposed to do. The love and compassion he showed with not only his instruction, but also in the sending of the prophets. How much of the Old Testament is the words of the prophets? An awful lot. God sent these prophets for a purpose, to bring these people back, to get them to see the error of their way and to bring them back so that they wouldn't have to face judgment. Ultimately, judgment came because the people didn't return. But slow to anger, slow to wrath, slow to judgment is how God dealt with the people. He's very patient, pleading with the people through the prophets. And then as we close this morning, think about how he deals with us today. Think about what we deserve versus what we really get. He's patient towards us, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9. Patient. We have time. We have his word. We're able to know his will. We're able to study and reason through those things. And, whenever we sin, we're not just killed on the spot, even though he would be fully justified in doing that. We have time to learn, time to grow, time to study. But as this passage also talks about, that's not going to go on indefinitely. There is going to be a judgment. There's going to be a time when God's patience runs out, just as it did in Old Testament times. But we have time now, and we have the ability to learn and grow and be better in our service to the Lord. So as we close this morning, think about your life, think about your direction, understand our need, especially of controlling our anger, but think about what God has done in order to show us the path to live, the path to stay on, and how we get from this life here to an eternity with him. It all starts by being a child of his. It starts by putting him on in baptism, surrendering our own life and recognizing we can't do it on our own, that we need help. Not just a little bit of help, we need a lot of help. And yet Jesus came to this earth to live the life that he did and to die on the cross so we can have forgiveness of sins. So we're not going to be held accountable for those things. But in the process, we learn that and we grow and we continue on in that growth until our life on this earth is over. If we can help this morning in any way, we'd like to do that. If you'll let it be known by coming forward, so that we stand and sing.